What's going on, guys? This is Rob. If you guys enjoy my content, make sure you hit the subscribe button and make sure you hit that little bell so you never miss out on my sexy voice. Members of the Rob Corps, what is up, guys? I'm sure a lot of you guys are just like, Court of Owls? What? Court of Owls? Okay, so here is the deal. Here's the explanation on this. I get questions all the time. I want to read Batman, where do I start? I want to read Superman, where do I start? Wonder Woman, Justice League, for whatever reason, I don't understand, Cyborg, but whatever the case may be, people are just like, I'm interested in this character and or team, and I want to know where to start, or will you make a video on this? Now, a lot of you guys have said that my upload schedule seemed kind of confusing, that I was covering too many series and it was hard to keep track. And that's true. That was a legitimate complaint. We had DC Rebirth and then Green Lantern. We had all new, all different Marvel, and then classic Spider-Man, Superior Spider-Man, that kind of thing. And so I figured what I'd go ahead and do, I've always tried to hold off from doing this since I try to maintain some measure of expectation on when certain videos are going to be out. But what we're going to do is we're going to basically update my video schedule. We're going to switch things around. So in the description, you will find an updated video schedule where basically every day has its own video style. So there is a day for the new 52, which are all the stories that led into DC Rebirth. There is a day for classic Marvel, basically everything before Secret Wars. There is a day for all new, all different Marvel, everything after Secret Wars. There is a day for Jeff Johns' Green Lantern run. It'll take us forever to finish. There's a day for indie comics and all that kind of good stuff, and a day for how to kill superheroes. Everything that you need will be in that schedule. So those of you guys who only care about classic Marvel will only find classic Marvel on the classic Marvel days. Those of you guys who only care about DC Rebirth, so on and so forth, that kind of thing, for all the video styles that are listed below. This is really just kind of testing the waters, just really kind of seeing how you guys respond to this. Having said that, for those of you guys who are new to DC Comics, the New 52 leads into DC Rebirth. So everything labeled New 52 will be before DC Rebirth. Now, I have playlists on Batman and stuff like that. What we're going to do is we're going to take these New 52 videos and we're going to put them before all the DC Rebirth stuff. That way you can watch the playlist in chronological order and not have to worry about anything. I'll take care of all the organization on this side. So all you have to do is just click the video and watch, and you don't have to try to figure out the viewing order or anything along those lines. So the fact remains here, New 52 Batman, Court of Owls, it's the best Batman story there ever was. Dare I say the best thing coming out of DC Rebirth. Technically, I guess the best thing leading into DC Rebirth. There we go. Scott Snyder, as the guy who was writing the story alongside Greg Capullo, they did not originate, or at least Scott Snyder did not originate on Batman with Court of Owls. In fact, he wrote a story before the New 52 called Batman Black Mirror. I was not wildly partial to it, but Scott Snyder and Greg Capullo's run on Batman in the New 52 is critically acclaimed. People absolutely love it. There was one time I went to go see Scott Snyder at New York Comic Con, and it was right at the end of his run on Batman Endgame or something like that. And the line was out the door and around the building. It was crazy how long it was to see him. It was one of the nuttiest things that I've ever seen. The fact remains here, with regards to Court of Owls, getting into the story proper, because I'm sure a lot of you guys are just like, get to the story, man. With regards to Court of Owls, this is cool because what it initially shows us is just Batman being Batman, right? Because keep in mind, this was the introduction of a lot of people to Batman comics. I mean, people knew who Batman was. He's a household name. He's a staple of pop culture in general, a staple of American society, if not world society. And so because of that, people getting into this are basically, just kind of picking this up with Batman just beating the hell out of people at Arkham Asylum. Now, really, it's just kind of like a revolt. People have managed to make their way out of their cells. We're not really told how explicitly, and it's not wildly relevant. But the funny thing is that in the middle of all this, we end up having the Joker joining the fray. Now, on the surface, this presented a really interesting scenario. And the reason why is because of the fact that the Joker is very much a wild card in the Batman mythos and even just the DC landscape as a whole. The Joker could pop up anywhere. The Joker could show up in Metropolis. The Joker could show up in Keystone City where, Jay Garrick is at, or I guess Jay Garrick was at. The Joker could pop up in Central City. He could pop up in Coast City. He could pop up all over the place. That's one of the cool things is you never know when he will appear. At the same time, whenever the Joker does show up, whether he appears to a villain or a good guy, no one knows what'll happen. Maybe he's there to just lend his aid for whatever reason, or maybe he's there to just kill everyone. Regardless, the Joker will show up and just implement these schemes that make sense to no one but himself. And so with the Joker being here, the idea is that he basically starts fighting on behalf of Batman. And the funny thing is that the villain response to this is, well, Joker's lost his mind. Joker's gone crazy. What in the world's going on here? Why is Joker fighting alongside Batman? Now, this is kind of cool because the conflict in and of itself is just just wrapped up really fast. I mean, it's not designed to be grandiose. It's just designed to be, hey guys, here's what Batman is about in the New 52. He's very similar to the Batman that you remember. Now, one thing that I do want to point out here is that when the New 52 first started, superheroes had basically only been around for about 5 years. And so the idea of Batman, Bruce Wayne being Batman for a decade or so, for years and years and years and years, that was gone. Not only that, Jim Gordon was still relatively new to Bruce Wayne. And so the trust that we were used to in the pre-New 52 continuity, the trust that had been built up between Jim Gordon and Batman wasn't there. They were effectively starting off fresh. And so because of that, Jim Gordon does trust Batman to a degree, but nowhere near the way that he did before the New 52. He still looks at him, still kind of believes, well, maybe Batman's a little bit nefarious. Maybe Batman, he is a vigilante. Maybe he's not necessarily on our side 100% of the time. Jim Gordon's still putting some feelers out there. He's still trying to get a lay of the land with regards to Batman. Of course, he doesn't know it's Bruce Wayne, but still trying to get a lay of the land with regards to the Batman character. Now, following this, we basically end up finding out that, the Joker was essentially Dick Grayson in disguise, which is cool, which is actually kind of interesting to see Batman employing these different forms of subterfuge against villains and different things like that, kind of throwing them off kilter and so on. But the other half of this is basically the public face that Batman puts on, the face of Bruce Wayne. And that's what's kind of ironic about the Batman character. We look at Batman and we say, okay, look, there's Bruce Wayne and there's Batman. But in truth, the real person is Batman. The face that the world sees is Bruce Wayne. It's almost like the line from Kill Bill, where he was talking about a staple of superhero mythology and Superman and Clark Kent and that kind of thing. Bruce Wayne is the alter ego. That's the disguise. That's the face that gets put onto the world. Batman is the actual identity. And that's what makes it so cool, is because Bruce Wayne is basically Batman. That's who he is at his core. Bruce Wayne is just the mask that he puts on when he talks to the world. But the other half of this is it shows us all the charitable works and the kind of things that he gets into. Of course, this whole notion that for the most part, he focuses heavily on the idea of trying to make Gotham City a better place. So it's a multifaceted attempt to basically make Gotham better. It's not enough to fight crime. It has to be something where he basically improves on impoverished areas. He gives money to the kind of charities that can do good in the city. So again, it's really focusing on the idea that Bruce Wayne trying to save Gotham is a two-sided coin. One side is beating up criminals in the middle of the night as Batman. The other side is putting money where it can best be used as Bruce Wayne. And so following this, we actually pick up with Harvey Bullock and we pick up with Batman with a burning sign that says, Bruce Wayne will die tomorrow, that kind of thing. But the other half of this is that there's also a guy who's basically been pinned to the wall and been injected with a ton of knives. Now, this is where the Court of Owls begins to come into play. And this is one of the reasons why the Court of Owls was so cool, is because we end up finding out there is a lot going on in the realm of Gotham that Batman just doesn't know about. What ends up happening is you basically pick up with, Batman and Jim Gordon and guy that does autopsies and stuff. The name escapes me, but we pick up with them kind of analyzing this body. And then of course, Batman shows up and Batman begins going through. And of course, what we end up finding is that in one of his teeth is a filling. And inside this filling is an owl symbol. And the whole notion is that this ties into an old rhyme that Bruce Wayne remembers as a kid about the Court of Owls. And essentially the way the rhyme went, it was one of those things where it was like the Court of Owls is this nefarious group that exists underground behind Gotham City. And if you talk bad about them, they'll come and find you. One of the things that this really seemed to hit home at is that it was a children's rhyme. It was designed to basically keep kids in check. If you don't do your homework, the Court of Owls will come and get you. If you treat people bad, the Court of Owls will come and get you. They'll send the Talon and the Talon will take you away, but you never know where the Court of Owls is at. It was really, really spooky when I first read this, because the idea of Bruce Wayne not knowing about this nefarious organization that exists within the realm of Gotham City is just kind of mind-blowing, right? Like, Bruce Wayne knows Gotham in and out. He knows it like the back of his hand. And that's the beauty of Court of Owls, is it takes the idea that Batman is Gotham and flips it on its head and says maybe there are things about Gotham that Batman doesn't know about, that Batman's totally unaware of. Now, of course, what this does is it says, look, it kind of creates this timetable of sorts where Batman has 12 hours before, whatever it is that happens leads to his death. But this actually comes, I guess, really kind of brings us to a meeting between Lincoln March and Bruce Wayne. Now, Lincoln March is a guy who's basically running for mayor. He's running for a major position in Gotham City proper. But the way that the kind of facade he puts on here, and really the way he engages in Bruce Wayne, is that they are very, very much similar. And that's kind of the cool thing here, is Bruce Wayne wants to put money where it can best be used. Lincoln March can make that happen. Lincoln March can basically say, hey, look, here are the areas where money can best be spent in the city. I've combed over, all the different areas that are basically struggling, the areas that are a little more abject, I guess, delving in abject poverty than anything else. Money can be put in these different places and it can be used the most effectively. The problem with this is that in the middle of this whole discussion, we basically end up running directly into the Talon. Now, the Talon is effectively the long arm of the Court of Owls. He is the guy that the Court of Owls sends out to take out those individuals who they've deemed to be a threat, which is to say those individuals that they want to have killed. Now, the funny thing about this is that Scott Snyder does a really good job of sort of going through and teasing these different concepts, teasing these different ideas of how far back the Court of Owls goes. For example, the Talon makes the statement, how I love killing Waynes. And so the question that was being presented here when this story first dropped is the Court of Owls responsible for the death of Thomas and Martha Wayne? Now, it creates kind of a funny situation because historically speaking in DC Comics, really in almost every iteration of Batman's origin, Thomas and Martha Wayne were basically killed by Joe Chill. There were times where the motivations of Joe Chill were changed, but he was always the guy that killed him. Now, more often than not, it was just Joe Chill was a guy who was down on his luck and he was struggling and he came across them, and they were people who looked as though they came from wealth. They had, jewelry, so on and so forth. And in the midst of the situation, in the heat of the moment, he pulled the trigger and killed them both. There's also been other things where it's like, Joe Chill was a mobster and so on and so forth. But the fact remains here that Joe Chill murdering the parents of Bruce Wayne is a core aspect of his whole story. So this is one of the things that really kind of intrigued people. It was the question of, is that the case? Is this really what's going on? Now, of course, in the middle of this fight between Batman and the Talon, one of the other things that Scott Snyder really hits at is the idea of how well Batman knows Gotham City. For example, in this whole rooftop fight, we end up having this scenario where they both fall out of the building. And the result is that, Bruce Wayne basically says, I know this city like the back of my hand. I know where the gargoyles are positioned around this building. And so I know where to jump out. I know where to go. I know how to make sure that I can survive by grabbing onto something. The Talon doesn't know that. And so where, Bruce Wayne jumps onto this gargoyle, the Talon presumably falls to his death, only for us to find out that the Talon is very much alive, which is revealed to us when he basically kills the paramedic. So again, what we end up doing is we basically follow this path that Bruce Wayne's going on in order to learn everything that's going on. And that's the other half of this. Scott Snyder spent a lot of time focusing on the notion of Bruce Wayne very much being a detective. Bruce Wayne very much being a guy who doesn't just go out and beat people up and punch around criminals and stuff like that. He uses his mind as much as he uses his fists and his feet. And so it's kind of cool because it's Scott Snyder basically reaffirming what existing Batman fans already know and informing new Batman fans that Bruce Wayne is a multifaceted guy. He's a jack of all trades and a master of all trades. He knows how to do it all. This eventually leads into Bruce Wayne meeting directly with Lincoln March. Of course, Lincoln March having been injured in the assault, but Lincoln basically kind of issues out this warning to Bruce Wayne that says, look, man, you have to watch out for the Court of Owls. Now, one major theme here is that Bruce was like, there is no Court of Owls. I would know if the Court of Owls exists. I'm Batman. If the Court of Owls is there, I know about it. I know Gotham better than anybody. And if the Court of Owls was real, I guarantee they would have been arrested, or I'd be keeping tabs on them or something like that. Now, what Lincoln does is he gives us like this really, really spooky situation. He's basically kind of told, look, I was warned by the Court of Owls, and what they did is they basically put like a little owl nest with some bones in my home. When I came home, I found that there. And that's really what the Court of Owls does. They issue these little warnings, and it's just kind of like a, hey, back off. Like, we're watching you. Whatever it is that you're doing, we don't like. Now, Scott Snyder also just kind of goes with this idea that it's like a big thing, right? I mean, the Court of Owls is not going to give you, a warning because you went to the wrong grocery store. What it is someone like Lincoln March that wants to issue a whole bunch of change around the city of Gotham is working against the interests of the Court of Owls. So it's basically Scott Snyder dropping these clues and essentially telling us that with the Court of Owls, that they are very much rooted in the history of Gotham, indicating here that the Court of Owls are basically composed of some of Gotham's wealthy elite. Now, again, we know what goes on with them now, but at the time of this story, we didn't know that. But again, this all really follows the idea of Batman investigating further, of Batman going through and trying to figure everything out. Now, just by virtue of his own investigations and his own resources, what Batman ends up doing is basically going to all these different buildings that are funded by the Allan Wayne Trust for Young Architects in Gotham Gotham City, basically those individuals that are being given charity money for the purpose of improving Gotham City's skyline. And every time he goes to the 13th floor, he ends up finding this small little place where evidence of the Court of Owls exists, and all of them seem to be locations of where the Talon resides. Now, the reason why this is kind of important is because Scott Snyder gives us these really kind of spooky but really cool instances of how smart Batman is. One of the things that he says is that cities are by definition very superstitious places. People, keep all kinds of superstitions. They throw salt over their shoulder and different things like that. It's not something that happens all the time, but there are people who are there. Allan Wayne was a very superstitious member of the Wayne family, and the result was that throughout his own life, he believed the number 13 was unlucky, as did a multitude of people. And so back in the early days of when cities were being built, when people were still very superstitious, when they built buildings, they would skip over the 13th floor. You would just go from 12 to 14. And the result is that you would keep this little section of the building where the 13th floor would normally be, and that would basically house the bad luck. And so in the mind of Bruce Wayne, if the Court of Owls exists, that would most likely be where they would reside or where evidence would belong. And as he goes through every single one of these buildings, that's exactly what he finds. He basically finds stockpiles of arms and armament. He finds all kinds of things that belong to the Court of Owls and documentation, photographs that proves their existence. Now, in the mind of Batman, he's still not 100% on board. Even after he goes into one of the buildings and he basically activates a trip device that ends up resulting in his, in a massive explosion that almost causes him to die, he still has a hard time believing it to be true. And the reason why is because of the fact that in a conversation that he has with Dick Grayson, we end up learning that following the death of Bruce Wayne's parents, that he believed the Court of Owls was behind it. As a child, he had heard the nursery rhyme, he'd heard the stories, heard the tales, and thought the Court of Owls may have been the ones who had led all this. And so what he ended up doing was going around and doing all this different research. Now again, this is Snyder showing us how early Batman's detective skills were honed and used. And so it really showed us that the death of his parents changed him in a fundamental way. But he started going through and looking at all these different clues, signs of owls, and different things like that, all of which basically led him back to a place called Harbor House. Now, Harbor House was a former meeting ground for Gotham's social elite. Now, it had long since been abandoned, but it had different signs of owls and so on and so forth. And so where Bruce Wayne as a child had basically looked around and believed the idea that if the Court of Owls was real, and they basically, not really worshipped owls so much as strongly associated themselves with owls, then places that would have a lot of decoration regarding owls would likely be their place of business. Now, this was also rooted in the idea that his parents, because they were part of Gotham's social elite and had associated with Gotham's wealthiest individuals, that those wealthy people were probably part of the Court of Owls. And so again, this all sort of fed into this idea that the Court of Owls were the ones behind his parents' murder. The problem with this is that once he gets to where he believed that they would be meeting or where they would be located, ultimately he finds absolutely nothing. He simply finds that there's nothing there. Now, in addition to this, Batman had actually exhumed Allan Wayne's body and just kind of analyzed his bones and different things like that. Again, all that basically went into him kind of tracing back the roots or the existence of the Court of Owls. Now, the reason why was because of the fact that Allan Wayne himself had died under mysterious circumstances. He was just found in a sewer one day. And so the result was he was identified by his dental records. What it ended up doing is it basically set in motion this idea that if Allan Wayne had just suddenly vanished under mysterious circumstances, if people are being killed, without any real indication of why, if the Court of Owls does exist, then the sewer may very well hold the answer. Now, again, Snyder's just kind of connecting these dots and he's just kind of bringing them together in a natural progression, which does make sense. But what Batman does is he says, look, on the bones of Allan Wayne was this kind of weird material, kind of like a white powder of sorts, which doesn't make any sense because of the fact that there's no material in the sewers of Gotham that has that same kind of substance attached to them. And so the indication seems to be that Allan Wayne was held in a place that was within Gotham, but not visible to the normal human eye, meaning it was very much hidden away. And so, of course, where he's in the middle of this whole investigation, he's ultimately surprised and subdued by the Talon, after which he wakes up in the labyrinth of the Court of Owls. Now, this is one of the coolest moments, and the reason why is because this shows us how easy it is for the Court of Owls to break the Batman, but it also shows us how far back they go and how extensively they've reached out and assassinated various people. Now, the Court of Owls, as they're shown to us, are basically people who wear these owl masks or these really, really cool masks over their faces. When this story came out, people were just cosplaying as Court of Owls. I mean, that's all you saw at Comic-Cons, were just like Court of Owl masks, and it was so cool to see. But the whole idea is that as he goes through this labyrinth, he's effectively losing his mind. He's losing his sanity. Now, this appears to be a combination of isolation and just constant exposure to light. The fact that he can't sleep. I mean, he's sleep deprived, he's almost dehydrated, hungry. I mean, it's just all these different things that sort of come together for the purpose of pushing Batman to the absolute brink of his sanity. And this really comes to play when he hallucinates his parents, who in turn basically begin kind of, rematerializing and dissolving and then turning into bats. And so again, it gets really, really crazy. But in the middle of all this, when he's basically just kind of losing his mind, starting to go insane, he's attacked from behind by the Talon and at least presumably killed. Now, again, this is really kind of Snyder just wrapping things up quick, fast, and in a hurry. But again, this is really significant here because very rarely have we ever seen Batman out of control, which is to say, not in control of his surroundings or not calm or not collected. That's a hallmark of Batman. No matter how bad it gets, no matter how terrible things are, Batman is the one guy that always stays sane. He's always the one guy that's like, there's got to be a way to think ourselves out of this. There's got to be a way for us to initiate a plan or to do something. He's the backbone of really the Justice League in a lot of ways. I mean, you got Superman, who's just pure strength. You have Wonder Woman, who's strength and strategy. You have Green Lantern. I mean, you have all these different characters. Batman is the backbone of the Justice League in terms of his intelligence, his resources, his ability to basically think himself and others out of almost any situation, to have a plan for virtually any scenario. To see him broken, to see him pushed to the brink of almost complete and total insanity is crazy. And it was absolutely nuts to read this at the time that it came out. It was like, good God, like Batman's lost his mind. And so it's really cool. But of course, what we end up having here is the scenario of the Court of Owls playing out, in the sense that when a person basically goes against the wishes of the court, when they're issued a warning and they ignore it and they're brought to the labyrinth, they're basically kind of pushed to the point of insanity and they're told you're going to lose your mind and then we're effectively going to kill you. And basically they're just kind of sacrificed. Now the judgment is made by the court themselves and the Talon is the one who carries it out. And so with the Talon being the agent of Batman, the Talon basically just kind of beats him up, fights him, with the intention of killing him. And then Batman more or less just kind of falls prey to his darker side. Now, the way this is shown by Greg Capullo and the way that it's written by Scott Snyder is a perfect example of how a metaphor meets reality, in the sense that Batman falling into his darker side, Batman basically losing his human nature and becoming a dark version of himself, is manifested in terms of how he looks. Now, he doesn't actually look this way. He hasn't grown teeth or anything like that. It's just kind of here to show us this is where Batman is now. He's basically dark. He's brooding. He's, not really evil. He's just kind of lost his humanity, even if only for a temporary amount of time. And so he's very, very feral. And so in this moment of desperation, in this moment of panic, he basically begins going against the Talon and fighting him off as best he can. But the other half of this is that Scott Snyder very much focuses on the intelligence of Batman, which is to say that once he recovers from this temporary insanity, once he subdues the Talon, he also just kind of goes back to being as intelligent as he is. And one of the things that he had done was that when he was going through the labyrinth, he had come across an old camera. Now, with regards to the court, because of the fact that they're so rooted in antiquity, because they use so many antique things, the camera that they use dates all the way back to the days when they basically used magnesium in order to create flashes in cameras. Now, in addition to being able to use magnesium, there was also flash powder, which is a combination of potassium chlorate and magnesium. And so what Batman basically realized was that inside this camera was essentially a filament plate that was made of potassium chlorate, and that because of the fact that he's so familiar with Gotham, he was in turn able to realize that the statue was basically white marble instead of construction marble, which makes it easier, it makes it softer and more prone to destruction. And so by putting these two together, he basically realizes he has a way out. He ignites the potassium chlorate, blows up the fountain, and escapes down through a hole. And that's the coolest thing here, is it shows us how smart Batman is, how capable he is. Now again, this is also basically Scott Snyder saying that this whole story about showing how Batman didn't know the Court of Owls existed really kind of hits home to the idea that yes, he's not as familiar with Gotham City as he would like, but he still knows it better than almost anybody. Not only that, it also shows us the arrogance and the hubris of the Court of Owls. And so that's kind of Scott Snyder bringing things back to roots, saying, hey, look, here's this clandestine organization that Batman never really seemed to know about. They seem almost, supernatural in terms of their form and function, but at the end of the day, they're people. they're bad guys. They're arrogant, they have hubris, they believe that nobody can defeat them. They've existed so long from the shadows that they can't envision a scenario where they could not only be discovered, but brought down. And so again, it's really just kind of hitting home to the nature, kind of wrap everything back around to the core of the Batman comics. Okay, so getting into New 52 Batman, well, technically it's called City of Owls, but it's really called like Night of the Owls, I think. Really in terms of how I sort of look at it, really it's like this great big huge like 12-issue story arc more or less. It might even be closer to 13, but it's really just kind of called the Court of Owls storyline, but it's really kind of split into two things. But the fact remains that this video right here will basically wrap up the court in the traditional sense. But the cool thing about this is that during the whole, revelation of the Court of Owls, Bruce Wayne had actually come across and realized the basis behind Dick Grayson. Now, this was really a little bit of a controversial thing. And the reason for this is because of the fact that Dick Grayson's history was pretty standard in the sense that he was very much like Bruce Wayne. Bruce Wayne witnessed his mother and father being killed by a guy in an alleyway, and it inspired him to become Batman. Dick Grayson was much the same way. He was part of a trapeze group called the Flying Graysons. His parents were killed, and the result was that he was taken in by Bruce Wayne and eventually desired revenge, allowing him to go forward as Bruce Wayne's trainee. The difference here is that as Robin, Dick Grayson was like this incorruptible character. Where Bruce was dark and Bruce was brooding, Dick Grayson always looked to the light, always looked to the better idea of how things could be. And for the most part, that was maintained to a degree, with regards to the New 52. He was still relatively similar to that. Now, of course, DC started messing around with his character a little bit, making him a secret agent, bringing in agencies like Spiral and different things like that. And that received kind of a lukewarm reception. Some liked it, some hated it. But with the Nightwing tie-in to the Court of Owls event, what we ended up finding out was that where traditionally Haley's circus was just a circus, in actuality, they were functioning with a pact that went alongside the Court of Owls. And what would happen is Haley's circus would basically present some of their most outstanding, acrobats, or their outstanding trapeze, and those trapeze would be used by the Court of Owls for the purpose of eventually becoming the Talon. Now, what this did is it expanded on the Talon mythos, and it actually introduced a guy by the name of William Cobb. Now, of course, DC tried to expand on the role of the Talon. It didn't really catch on, and nobody really cared that much. In truth, they just kind of viewed him as a henchman, and that was really about it. But the idea was that William Cobb was one of a long line of men who had played the role of the Talon. Just like the Court of Owls, the modern day, iteration of the Court of Owls was one of a long line of groups who have been part of the Court of Owls. And the idea here was that the court would basically poison the bloodstream of individuals with something called electrum, I believe it was. And what would essentially happen is it would permeate their cells, so that when the time came when that person died for whatever reason, whether it was old age, whether they were killed prematurely, whatever the case may be, the Court of Owls would take their body, they would basically bring them back to life with something called Dionysium, and then in turn, they would become a Talon. And that was the intention for Dick Grayson. That Dick Grayson was basically selected by the court to be their newest Talon once William Cobb served his purpose or was presumably dead, or whatever the case may be. And so what would happen is Dick Grayson would basically live out his life, in whatever means he ended up living it out in, and then maybe he'll die in a car wreck, or maybe he'll die of old age, or whatever the case may be. But when that happens, he would be brought in by the Court of Owls, and then they would basically make him into a Talon. And so he would go forward basically as one of their assassins. Now, of course, it wouldn't really be old age that would kill him. I mean, they would have him killed probably in the prime of his life, just to make sure that you didn't have like a 90-year-old Dick Grayson running around trying to assassinate people. But the fact remains here, he had unwittingly been selected as an assassin. And so again, that was kind of a huge revelation here. And so what that did is it really kind of like doubled the efforts of Bruce Wayne, right? Because now, Scott Snyder and DC had basically established that it wasn't just a matter of, oh, I need to stop the Court of Owls. Now it was, the Court of Owls aren't just trying to seize control of Gotham City, they're turning the lives of people upside down. And so again, it really kind of doubled the efforts of Bruce Wayne in his desire to take them out. Now, of course, again, when we ended the last video of the Court of Owls, we had basically picked up with the idea that the court themselves had basically gone through and said, okay, look, if Batman's going to work against us, then if we cannot take control of the city by going in and influencing candidates and operating behind the scenes, then we'll take the city by force. And so what they did is they basically unleashed all of their Talons and sent them all throughout Gotham City. Now, this is when the comic books of like Nightwing, and I think Batgirl had been published at the time, and Detective Comics and a few others basically came in and covered a lot of the Night of Owls stuff. All that really happened with the court with regards to those real tie-ins, that's why we haven't really covered them, is because we're focusing mostly on Batman. All that it really happened with those tie-ins is the Bat family had discovered that the court looked to take out certain individuals who were influential in Gotham, but stood against the court or worked against the goals and desires of the court, whether those people knew about the court or not. All the Bat family really did, everybody outside of Batman for the most part, all they really did was run around and save those people who were on the hit list. That was really it. I mean, that was really the extent of it. It was interesting, but it's by no means required reading for, for the whole Court of Owls story with Batman. But with regards to Bruce himself, the court actually goes through and really the Talons just kind of descend on Wayne Manor and immediately attack him. Now, this is kind of the important thing here, because what ends up happening, and really what we saw with regards to, the first Court of Owls video that we did, is that the court themselves knew that Bruce Wayne was Batman. And that was really one of the big revelations, because in the realm of DC, the DC universe, one of the most closely guarded secrets is the identity of Batman, the identity of Superman, the identity of Wonder Woman. That's one of the most closely guarded things. They try not to let the world know about that, just because of the fact that if people knew that Clark Kent was Superman, then Lois Lane would be in jeopardy, and Perry would be in jeopardy, and so on and so forth, Jimmy Olsen and so on. Bruce Wayne is the exact same way. If they knew that Bruce Wayne was Batman, you could just literally tear down everything that Bruce Wayne's built. You could launch a multitude of campaigns against him. Now, this one is a little more tangible, and it's really kind of Scott Snyder bringing in the other half of Batman's storytelling, and that's why it's so cool. Because historically speaking, whenever we read Batman's stories, we expect to see a blend of detective work and then fighting. I mean, that's really one of the things we like to see, is Batman just beating people up. It's one of the coolest things about his storytelling, how ruthless he can be sometimes, push a person to the point where they genuinely believe they're going to die, but of course we know Batman's not actually going to kill him. With regards to this tidbit here, the Talons descending on Wayne Manor proper is really just for the purpose of taking out Bruce Wayne. So of course what he ends up doing is donning this massive, Hellbat suit more or less, and just taking it to town on these Talons. I mean, really just kind of wrecking through every last one of them, because in truth, despite the fact that these guys are relatively undead, despite the fact that these guys, are pretty formidable, in the end, they're not really able to take out Bruce Wayne. Now, of course, the reason why is because of the fact that Batman realizes that these Talons are able to run around and they're able to do their own thing because they're not frozen. Basically, extremely cold temperatures is the tool that's used by the court to keep the Talons in stasis, more or less. And so Batman's realization, of this information is to essentially freeze all these guys up, to basically, use a multitude of different resources to basically put them back in stasis again by using very cold temperatures. And so, of course, this in conjunction with unleashing his bats on, the various members of the Talon, really kind of wraps things up pretty fast. And so, of course, once the temperature drops low enough, all these guys more or less just kind of freeze and go back into stasis again, and that's really the end of them. And so what it does is it allows Batman to turn his attention to the most logical target of the court themselves, Lincoln March. Now, here was the kind of cool thing about these tie-ins. The way the tie-ins took place is they all happened basically in a time frame, which means that like at 7 o'clock, this happens in Nightwing. At, 8 o'clock, this happens in Detective Comics. At 9 o'clock, this happens in Batgirl. The problem with this is that you would literally have to break the comics down page by page in order to cover it in true chronological order. Otherwise, you end up reading Nightwing, and then halfway through Nightwing, you have to stop and then read Detective Comics, and then like a quarter of the way through Detective Comics, you have to stop and jump to Batgirl. Like, it gets really kind of weird the way it all comes together, and it really kind of threw things off. It was cool if you can assemble it that way. It makes it for a really, really interesting and cohesive story, but in terms of what we're trying to do here, it would confuse the hell out of you guys. So we're not going to do that. We're literally not going to do a play-by-play, like, and then we switch over to Nightwing at 7:32 p.m. Like, we're not going to do that. Instead, Batman, of course, travels to go see Lincoln March. Now, again, in the last video, we had covered this, and we had basically said that Lincoln shared an identity, shared an affinity for Batman in terms of how it is that they viewed Gotham City. And a lot of this revelation came at the top of Wayne Tower, the building that was being constructed by Bruce Wayne, that was basically going to be this beacon of hope for the city of Gotham and a beacon to the world, saying that Gotham is a desirable place to live. And it was a really cool exchange between the two of them, because Lincoln March had told this very interesting story to Bruce Wayne about how Lincoln's mother had died, and the last thing that he had of her possession was basically this misshapen heart-shaped pendant. And it was kind of cool to see this, this exchange between the two of them, because of the fact that it was a very human moment for both. It was basically both of them realizing that they had the same goals and they had the same ambitions at heart. The problem with this was that, as Lincoln March had explained, he was directly working against the Court of Owls because of the fact that the court had basically warned Lincoln, stray away from the path that you're on. Move away from this road that you're on, because you're conflicting our interests and we will kill you if you don't. And so again, because of this, with Lincoln March effectively on his deathbed, it's almost like he's trying to get revenge by passing the name of the members of the Court of Owls directly to Bruce Wayne himself. And so what we do is we transition to a group, basically a family that are called the Powers family. Now, this is really interesting because it's basically composed of Joseph and his wife Maria. And the reason why this is important is because it shows us that when when it comes to wealthy individuals, Bruce Wayne is not the only game in town. Now, for the most part, we always kind of figured that was the case, right? I mean, we always kind of figured that Bruce Wayne wasn't like the only rich guy in Gotham, but there wasn't a whole lot of expansion in terms of the really wealthy in Gotham as far as normal people go. We would see them from time to time, but more often than not, it would be like Two-Face has a ton of money and he's doing nefarious things. It would be like Penguin has a ton of money and he's running a criminal empire or something along those lines, and here's how he runs into Batman this time. That was really it. That was really the only confine there. When it came to Scott Snyder expanding on the Batman mythos, it wasn't just about creating a new group in Gotham City, or at least introducing a group in Gotham City that Batman didn't know about that had been operating for hundreds of years. It was bolstering that. It was basically grabbing other members of Gotham's elite and saying, what if some of Gotham's, wealthiest people out there were working against Gotham proper? And so again, it's kind of a cool scenario, because what it tells us is that where Batman operates from the shadows, bringing down criminals, there are individuals who operate from the shadows to conquer Gotham. And that was really what was going on with the Court of Owls. The Court of Owls wouldn't necessarily intervene by, sending an army into Gotham City like they did with Night of the Owls. Instead, they would influence politicians. They would pay off judges. They would do different things, either that or they would snatch them up and they would drag them to the labyrinth and say, you can spend the rest of your days in this place until you go crazy and basically, kill yourself, or you can do what we tell you to do. And the alternative is to basically just walk rank and file. That's exactly what they would do. So the Court of Owls functioned in a lot of different ways. But of course, with Bruce Wayne being given the names of these individuals by Lincoln March, this highlights a very important part of the story. What this seems to indicate from Scott Snyder is that Batman never would have realized who they were on their own. They were too well hidden. Joseph and Maria Powers were just too well hidden. They were too far hands off. Nobody would have known who they were or that they were even involved in the Court of Owls. Now, a lot of the reason why this was the case was simply because of the fact that the Powers family lived in more or less a penthouse in a building that nobody could gain access to. Unless you were personally invited, that place was a fortress. The press was not allowed in there. The general public was not allowed in there. There's no indication that Bruce Wayne ever saw the inside of that. They were very reclusive, very shut off. Now, the indication or the question that we would kind of have to ask here is, well, then wouldn't that make them the most logical people to be the Court of Owls? If they were so reclusive, aren't they the first ones that Bruce Wayne would think of? Yes and no, because you also have to think from himself. Bruce Wayne's very reclusive. Bruce Wayne hides out in Wayne Manor almost all day long. Now, for him, it's because he's Batman and because he's fighting against crime, different things like that, but no one knows what goes on behind closed doors. What seems to be going on here is that when it comes to the wealthy elite in Gotham, it's, hey, you leave me alone, I leave you alone, and we'll just call it a day. That really seems to be what's happening here. And so, of course, with Batman tracing down the location of the Court of Owls after essentially kind of interrogating Maria Powers, what ends up happening here is Alfred, of course, basically says, hey, look, she's calling her husband. Your plan to basically trace the location of her husband worked. The problem is that his phone is in a blacked out area, so I can only give you a few blocks, but I can't tell you exactly where it's located at. But this is when Scott Snyder's running comes full circle, when his whole story comes back to full circle again. And the reason why is because in the last video, we had talked about how after the death of Bruce Wayne's parents, he had investigated the Court of Owls, believing that the court were the ones that were responsible for his parents' death. That instead of killing his parents directly, they hired some low-level guy named Joe Chill to have his parents killed and then just make it look like a crime of desperation. When in reality, Bruce Wayne believed the Court of Owls were the ones who pulled it off. What this ends up telling us is that where Bruce Wayne originally went to Harbor House, believing the Court of Owls operated out of there and found nothing, the truth is that he was right. The entire time, he was right, where he doubted himself, where he said, no, I went there and I poked around, all the clues led to this place being the Court of Owls. I guess I was wrong. This is Scott Snyder saying, here's how smart Bruce Wayne is. He's always been this smart. He follows the clues, he listens to logic, he listens to reason, and all the clues and all the signs indicated that the Court of Owls operated out of Harbor House. Now, this is kind of cool because this is basically a scenario where it essentially seems like the Court of Owls themselves are not keeping their tracks as clean as they thought they would, or maybe they were relying on the intelligence of adults who would consider some things to be nonsensical and ignore them, when in reality, that nonsensical thing is an important clue to point to the location of the court themselves. Now, of course, when Bruce gets to the court proper, he basically finds that they're all dead. I mean, every last one of them have been dead. They essentially drank some kind of a substance and it ended up killing them all. Now, of course, this seems to be like a ritualistic suicide of sorts that they realize, or at least, as Alfred explains it to Bruce Wayne, that Batman had basically taken the city back. Batman now knew about the Court of Owls, and the court themselves realize it was only a matter of time before he brought them all down. And so they essentially just kind of killed themselves so they wouldn't have to wait for any measure of, of a trial, being arrested or anything along those lines. And so again, the great thing about this is that Scott Snyder gives every indication that this is where the story ends. He gives every indication that this is where it all stops, but it doesn't. And that's why I love this run so much, because then he takes everything that we've seen so far and flips it on its head. And that's the coolest thing. The reason why is because of the fact that Bruce Wayne is supposed to have a meeting later on today. And of course, Alfred is talking to him about the meeting, when it's supposed to be scheduled, and he needs to get ready and so on and so forth. But having a conversation, looking at a picture of Thomas and Martha Wayne, Batman takes off. And it's the coolest thing in the world. And the reason why is because he travels to the morgue of where Lincoln March is supposed to be and simply finds a note that says, "Follow me down the rabbit hole." Now, this is a universal sign in literature. Ever since Alice in Wonderland was written, by Lewis Carroll, Alice in Wonderland tumbling down the rabbit hole with absolutely no idea what you'll find below, has been a literary metaphor for the idea of walking down a path with no idea what's there. With, basically walking down a tunnel with a blindfold on. And it's really Scott Snyder saying that Batman's just following a trail of breadcrumbs with no idea what's at the other end. But what we end up doing is getting this little bit of an explanation about a place called the Willowwood Home for Children. Now, to be honest, this is creepy, and it's one of the creepiest things that I've seen so far. It's almost like Waverly Hills Sanatorium or whatever it is. If you never had a chance, look it up. It's this creepy place in Louisville, Kentucky. And a buddy of mine, we're actually going to spend the night there on Halloween one night, but we decided not to because we kind of figured that that's the place that you go to when you accidentally stumble into a portal that leads you to another dimension. That's basically hell. We're not even messing with that. Ghosts and monsters and stuff like that. Not at all. But this is actually this is really kind of creepy here. And the reason why is because of the fact that what we're told is that the Woodford Home for Children was basically this place where kids with mental disorders were taken. But what we're shown here are like blood prints and different things like that. And as is explained to us, there was basically a sinkhole that swallowed up the orderlies' quarters. And what ended up happening here is that because of the fact that this place was so far removed from Gotham City proper, and because of the fact that nobody ever checked on any of the children here, that when somebody finally did come stumbling along, they basically found all the orderlies dead, and the kids just either starving to death, or dying of dehydration, walking around naked, absolutely disheveled, and living in their own filth and squalor. I mean, it's a really, really sad set of circumstances. But what this is designed to do is feed into the sad nature of Gotham City, in the sense that Gotham is looked at by a lot of people as a broken city. I mean, it's broken and it's beyond hope, beyond redemption, and should be allowed to die. Just the traditional, line, the whole plot that we saw from Batman Begins. Gotham City is a laboring beast gasping for breath. Let the damn thing die. But of course, we know that Batman simply won't let that happen, and the idea is to always try to breathe new life into it. And so again, this really kind of hits home at the nature of all that. Now, of course, what we end up finding out is that Lincoln March, as he had basically, kind of taunted Batman to come to this location, begins talking to him about how, who he really is, what he's really about. And what we end up finding out here is that it was Lincoln March who basically led to the deaths of all the members of the Court of Owls. He had essentially poisoned all of their drinks while they were in their meeting. They all died. At the same time, Bruce Wayne basically recalls, or, really kind of brings the reason up in terms of why he took off in the first place. And the reason why was because of the story that Lincoln March had given Bruce Wayne in the Wayne Tower, when Lincoln March had talked about how his mother had died and left him, this misshapen heart pendant and that kind of thing. And Bruce Wayne remembered that was the exact same pendant that Martha Wayne was wearing in that picture. And so the implication seemed to be here that Lincoln March was a false name, that he was basically grabbing little clues and hints from the life of Bruce Wayne and rolling them in to a cohesive story. Now, what Lincoln March does here is he basically presents the scenario that he himself is Bruce Wayne's brother. The reason being because of the fact that while he does have that misshapen heart pendant, those pendants are only given to people who are basically children that live within this school for homes. And so what Lincoln March is essentially saying here, that Martha Wayne is his mother, and he's basically the brother that Bruce Wayne never knew about. Now, one of the crazy things about this is that for a lot of people, the ending of this story seemed to be an instance where Scott Snyder kind of wrote himself into a corner and didn't quite know how to get out again. But the great thing about this, and really one of the reasons why I loved this, is because of the fact that it's designed to kind of ask all these what if questions about Bruce Wayne. Remember, the entirety of the Court of Owls is designed for the purpose of bringing in the possibility that Bruce Wayne does not know as much about Gotham as he thought he did. I mean, he claims to know the streets inside and out. He claims to know the buildings inside and out. He claims to know the people inside and out, but he didn't know the powers and other members of Gotham's wealthy elite composed the Court of Owls. He didn't know the Court of Owls was there. This is another instance where Scott Snyder is basically hitting home with the idea that maybe this guy, Lincoln March, is actually Thomas Wayne Jr. Maybe he is the legitimate son of Thomas and Martha Wayne, and Bruce just never knew about it the entire time. Now, again, from here, this really just kind of descends down into an exercise in traditional comic book battling, in the sense that you basically just kind of have Bruce Wayne fighting against Thomas Wayne Jr., and that's really about it. Now, of course, the conflict leads directly to Wayne Tower proper, and the whole idea here of Lincoln March is to essentially, or I guess of Thomas Wayne, is to basically bring the tower down around Bruce. And the reason why is because this fits in to the entirety of the narrative as it's given to us by, Thomas Wayne. What he basically says here, or at least what both he says and what Bruce Wayne deduces, is that Thomas Wayne was presumably left within this, that home for children by the Waynes to keep him hidden away from the world. The result was that they had Bruce Wayne himself, and Bruce Wayne became the rightful heir of the Wayne family. While this was going on, because of the fact that Thomas was basically abandoned and left behind, he was adopted by the Court of Owls and then brought in and raised by the court. And so the idea was that he basically showed up as Gotham City's savior, when in reality, he was just a puppet of the Court of Owls. And so what ended up happening here is that when he was presumably killed by one of the Talons, when Bruce Wayne stumbled in and Thomas Wayne, operating as Lincoln March, gave Bruce Wayne the names of the members of the court, in truth, he had actually ingested this very serum that the Talons use in order to keep them alive, and then more or less kind of resurrected himself, so to speak. And so the idea here was that if he was going to basically replace Bruce Wayne, he was going to kill off Bruce Wayne and carry on the memory of Bruce by operating as the city's mayor, or one of his most contributing members, then he's going to do exactly that by killing Bruce Wayne and then effectively taking his place. Oh, Bruce Wayne passed away, but I'm his brother, Thomas Wayne Jr. Here's the documentation to prove it, so on and so forth. Now, of course, Bruce basically uses the hubris of Thomas Wayne. When Thomas Wayne begins detonating the various bombs that he's planted in Wayne Tower to bring it all down, Bruce Wayne manages to make his escape. And so what Scott Snyder does is he leaves everything ambiguous. He leaves it with the idea that Thomas Wayne Jr. basically survived. Now, we know that by way of the story Batman Eternal, which I'm not really sure if we're going to cover that or not, but we know that Thomas Wayne survived and he ends up coming back. What Scott Snyder did with him there was kind of interesting, but I wouldn't say nearly as prevalent as his role here in the Court of Owls storyline. But of course, in the midst of all this, Batman's basically visited, that kind of thing. And the crazy thing about this is that the conversation between the two of them indicates that Bruce actually believes that Thomas Wayne Jr. might really exist. Now, of course, he goes through the paperwork and begins looking at the history of the Waynes, of Thomas and Martha Wayne, everything that they had done. And what he ends up finding out here is that indeed he did actually have a brother who only lived for one night. He was basically born under duress. The child was hooked up to an incubator and died within 12 hours. But the question cannot be helped but ask, what if it was all a cover? What if Thomas and Martha Wayne gave birth to a son and then were told, well, your son has complications, which they witnessed those complications, and the doctor, under orders from the Court of Owls, told Thomas and Martha Wayne, I'm sorry, your child has passed away. There's nothing we can do. The child was effectively brought back or taken by the court, raised by the court, and then became Lincoln March, all the while being told, you are Thomas Wayne Jr., you are the rightful son of Thomas Wayne and Martha Wayne, you're the rightful heir to the Wayne fortune and the Wayne family. Bruce Wayne can't help but wonder, is any of that true? And Scott Snyder asks us that question. Do you think it's true? Do you really believe that Bruce Wayne actually has a brother named Thomas? The issue with this is that we're never given a definitive answer in the story. We're never told for any real measure of certainty. Instead, the mystery is just kind of out there. The question is just kind of there. And again, it all really kind of feeds back into this notion that Bruce Wayne does not know Gotham City as well as he thinks he does. Now, again, this all feeds back into the whole notion, or I guess the whole idea that Bruce Wayne himself is still relatively new to the role of Batman. Remember, when the New 52 first started, it's only been 5 years since Bruce Wayne put on his cloak and cowl for the very first time and became Batman. So, he doesn't really know Gotham as well as we would think he would know in the classic Batman stories before the New 52. Okay, so getting into Batman, Death of the Family, I guess New 52 Batman, Death of the Family. Keep in mind, guys, for those of you guys who are joining us for the very first time, anything marked New 52 comes before DC Rebirth. Again, I'll have it before DC Rebirth in the playlist, so you won't have to feel confused or thrown off or anything like that. But Death of the Family is probably one of the greatest stories ever written in Batman history, to be honest with you guys. I absolutely love it because it really changes the way we view the Joker, right? Like, historically speaking, the Joker, depending on what era you're reading him, has always been this sort of comedic, sometimes even slapstick character. I mean, back when he first showed up in DC Comics, he was very violent, very dark, but because of the comics code, he had to be made a little more funny. Now, of course, he was returned to his darker roots under Neil Adams, I think it was, but by the time Steve Englehart came around, that basically gave us Batman the Animated Series Joker. And so then, of course, we saw his character kind of wax and wane over the years. And in the days, really kind of like the years leading up to the launch of a New 52, the Joker was still very much this somewhat, I guess a great blend of like evil and comedy. But what this gives us here under Scott Snyder is just a genuinely dark and twisted Joker. And the stories are almost scary because of like how the Joker is. Like it's almost terrifying, in the sense that Scott Snyder just made him so fresh and so fun and so interesting. So there are a couple of things that I do want to point out here. For those of you guys who are really confused about Batman with regards to like DC Rebirth, New 52, so on and so forth, there really is no classic Batman, which is to say Batman before the New 52. Instead, there's only New 52 Batman. But what DC did is they started doing things like this in Death of the Family. And we'll start, we'll talk about these as we go through the story, but they basically started grabbing, comics and grabbing events from the classic Batman era and rolling them in. And so that's one of the things that kind of confused people about like the stance of Batman, the hard reboot, that sort of thing. But the fact remains here that with regards to the return of the Joker, this is twofold. In Detective Comics #1, because with this whole thing starting, when New 52 Batman first started, there was neither hide nor hair of the Joker. I mean, he was just kind of gone for a while. The only appearance he had was in Detective Comics #1, and that was it. It was like it was your standard fare of Joker storytelling. It was the Joker who was engaging in a scheme, Batman was chasing after him, it was this cat and mouse game, the Joker was captured, and that was it. But the story ended on this very enigmatic kind of tone where it seemed like the Joker's face was basically removed, and then we didn't know what was going to happen after that. Like, we had no idea. The Joker effectively just vanished. Like, that was it. The Joker was just gone. And so because of that, fans were just kind of like, where's the Joker? We want the Joker, because the Joker is consistently ranked as the #1 greatest villain in comic books, just because of the fact that he's so crazy, his schemes are kind of nuts, and he's such an interesting character. But with regards to his return here, this came in a beautiful way. So initially, we just kind of pick up with Commissioner Gordon and Harvey Bullock and a few other people in the Gotham City Police Department. Nothing too major, but the power suddenly goes out. Now, the backup generators do come on, but we get this really eerie glimpse of the Joker just standing in a hallway. And that right there really kind of hits to me as one of the scariest things about the Joker, because it's scarier to me than like the Joker copywriting fish, or it's scarier to me than the Joker just going on like a murder spree or anything like that. The fact that you would just like, the power would go down to a building, the generators would come on, and you'd look at the doorway and there would just be this crazy guy with a hidden face standing in the doorway. That's just terrifying to me. What the Joker does is he really just kind of like taunts Jim Gordon. And this is Scott Snyder saying, hey guys, look, this is the Joker that we're getting now. This is the Joker you're gonna see. This is not the crazy comedic Joker, the one you're used to from Batman the Animated Series. This is the dark, sinister Joker. This is the one that you guys have always been wanting to see. The return to Batman #1 Joker, the dark, evil, sadistic, do whatever it is that he wants to do kind of version of his character. And so the crazy thing is that as he's taunting Jim Gordon, he's going around and killing cops all around Jim Gordon. Now, this is designed to really kind of be a throwback of sorts to the Killing Joke, I guess, in the sense that during the Killing Joke story, Jim Gordon was put on this roller coaster of terror, and he was made to view all these different images of Barbara Gordon in a very vulnerable state. For the most part, they were naked images. There was some allusion to the idea that she had been physically assaulted in multiple ways by the Joker or the Joker's henchmen, and Jim Gordon was forced to look at these different images as it was happening. It was very much a ride of absolute insanity, but it was the helplessness that made that scene so, impactful in the Killing Joke. And that's what's happening here. The Joker's walking around in the pitch black, killing all these different cops under the command of Jim Gordon. And one, he's not quite paralyzed with fear, but there's nothing he can do to stop the Joker because he can't find him. He can't see him. And that's what makes things so crazy, is because once Batman shows up on the scene, we don't really know exactly how he got there, but presumably presumably somebody did something, or Batman was just kind of patrolling, or he just noticed the power went down at Gotham City Police Department. But once Batman gets there, of course, he more or less rescues Jim Gordon, who's clearly shaken by the ordeal, but the Joker had also stolen his face back. Now, at this point, it's really just kind of an exercise by Alfred and by Batman to really just kind of figure out why the Joker came back. And that's one of the things that makes this character so interesting, is because no one knows what the schemes of the Joker are based on. I mean, for God's sake, he had a scheme called the Laughing Fish, where he wanted to make fish look like him and then copyright them. That was the scheme. Like that was it. It's Joker storytelling. It's classic Joker stuff. And that's what makes him so cool, is because no one knows what he's going to do next. Now, the funny thing about this is Damian Wayne has never really encountered the Joker in a tried and true fashion. And so while he's there watching the whole investigation between Alfred and Bruce Wayne, and while they're, Alfred and Bruce are just talking about how dangerous the Joker is and how they have to tread carefully and things like that, Damian Wayne's ready to jump in headstrong. And I love this, because I feel like moments like this really kind of give us that that kind of yes, the Joker is dangerous. The Joker is someone to be afraid of, because Batman's warning to Damian is, do not take the Joker lightly. Yes, he's got no powers whatsoever. He does not have super strength. He doesn't have super speed, any of that stuff. But the fact that you never know what he's going to do is what makes him so dangerous. 9 times out of 10, if the Joker says he's going to do something, he's already done it, and he's just sending you on a wild goose chase. Case in point, they basically interrupt a broadcast made by a guy, where the Joker just has this guy tied down to a chair, and the Joker's acting like, his arms are the guy's arms or whatever, but what he basically says is that Mayor Haiti is going to die at midnight. Now, this is not Scott Snyder going through and just repeating the past. He is, but he's doing it for a reason. When I was going through this story, my first thought was, well, this is just a throwback to Batman #1, right? Like to the Joker's first appearance. I'm going to kill the mayor at midnight. That kind of thing. That's not the case. Instead, what happened originally in Batman #1 is the Joker was going to kill the mayor at midnight, but it was because he had poisoned him 24 hours beforehand. In this story, it's a lot more interesting. It's a lot more intriguing. And it shows us how smart the Joker is. Because remember, when the Joker first popped up, he was just a guy who was dressed as a clown and did crazy things. With regards to this, what we end up finding out is the Joker actually poisoned Mayor Haiti already, but only with half the solution necessary to kill him. In the sense that what he had done is he had basically just kind of poisoned the chemical that was used to mop the mayor's floor, and then, dab some chemical onto the clothing of the various police officers who are guarding Mayor Haiti. And so quite literally, the police killed the mayor, in the sense that when the two chemicals basically merged, the chemical on the clothing of the cops and the residue that's left over from the floor, when those converge together, it basically results in everybody losing their minds, everybody being exposed to a version of the Joker toxin. Now, this is where Scott Snyder begins to turn the story on its head, because we look at the Joker toxin and it's inherently, and it's always really been, a toxin that kills people with just this disgusting grin on their face. With this, they die from frowns. And so it's really basically the Joker going through and essentially committing his own crimes, but at the same time doing it in such a way that is just a little bit different from the way it was before. Now, the reason why this matters and the reason why this is significant is because the Joker is key to understanding the continuity of Batman in the New 52. Under normal circumstances, anybody would look at Batman and say, well, he's just classic Batman, and for whatever reason made it into the New 52. Not at all. What DC did when Batman was first launched in New 52 is they said, okay, Superman gets a hard reboot. He's totally reset. This is a brand new Superman. None of the things that happened in classic DC happen in the New 52. We're just going through his stories for the very first time. The Flash, it was the same way. Wonder Woman, it was the same way. All that stuff, it was the exact same way. With Batman, it was not. What DC started doing is they said, okay, let's grab classic DC stories like The Killing Joke, and let's say it took place in the New 52. And let's grab classic stories like Nightfall, and let's say it took place in the New 52. It took place off panel, and we didn't see that story happen, but it's simply just, it's a story that's explained to have taken place in the 5 years between the time when Bruce Wayne first put on the cloak and cowl and the modern day when his stories picked up. And so we were just kind of told somewhere along the line, The Killing Joke happened. Somewhere along the line, Nightfall happened. And that's kind of the cool thing here, is because what we're also told is that over the course of Batman's history, his first encounter with the Joker as Red Hood took place. The first time, or I guess, really when they met, and it led to Joker falling into this vat of chemicals, surviving, and then coming out with green hair and bleached skin, that happened. These are the kind of things that sort of just got rolled into his New 52 do by grabbing classic DC stories and making them official continuity in DC. And so again, with Batman basically, going through and deciphering these chemicals that were used by the Joker and figuring out that the composition spells out the words ACE, Ace Chemical, once he gets there, he actually finds out that the Red Hood that he sees is not the Joker. Instead, of course, is Harley Quinn. This is designed as a distraction to remove Batman from the equation. But we end up finding out the reason this is done is in order for the Joker to basically kidnap Alfred Pennyworth. Now, anybody who knows anything about Batman comics will tell you that Alfred Pennyworth is the one guy who's off limits. I mean, you do not touch Alfred Pennyworth, right? Like Alfred, man, he's the bro. Alfred is the bro. You do not touch Alfred. He's just one of the coolest guys. And so, of course, with Alfred in danger, with Batman effectively figuring out what's going on pretty fast, and with the Joker basically leaving behind a tape that essentially just kind of taunts Batman, like, yeah, I have, Alfred, and so on and so forth. It sends Bruce into this almost a maddening state, not in the sense that he loses his mind, but in the sense that for him, Alfred is the closest thing he has to a father. And to have this person taken away by the Joker is like losing his father all over again. And so it really sort of speeds up the timeline. It moves things into a really endurance-based motion because in his mind, it's only a matter of time before the Joker kills Alfred. But the question is, what happens between now and the time that Alfred dies? And that's what's the most terrifying, is because Batman has no earthly clue what the Joker will do. And that's what makes the Joker so dangerous. With Two-Face, he's probably just gonna kill you. With Penguin, it's probably gonna interrogate you for information, maybe ransom you, or even probably, possibly kill you. There's a handful of options that any of those guys might consider, but the Joker is so insane that there's no telling what it is that he's going to do. Now, of course, from here, it's a matter of targeting Jim Gordon, and that's essentially what's happening. Now, something that I want you to keep in mind here is the way in which Jim Gordon is poisoned. He basically receives a blood thinner at the hands of the Joker, and he just starts bleeding out incredibly fast. Now, the Joker did that for a very particular reason, and we'll find that out here in a second. And again, it really hits home at the idea of the fact that the Joker is very intelligent in terms of what he thinks and in terms of what he does. But ultimately, what ends up happening is Batman essentially traces the Joker's location down to a local bridge. And the reason why is because of the fact that this is another one of the crimes the Joker had committed. Now, this is Scott Snyder essentially telling us this is what the motivation of the Joker is. That historically speaking, Batman and Joker have just kind of gone round and round and round and round. And that was really it. The Joker would escape from Arkham Asylum, he would commit some crimes, Batman would chase him, Batman would catch him, the Joker would be arrested, thrown in Arkham Asylum, and the cycle would repeat. That's just the way the game was played. But the funny thing here is that the Joker, more or less just kind of reattaching his face with strings, even goes so far as to taunt Batman and say, look, this is the game we play, right? I mean, it's the game that we always play. I go to a bridge and I threaten to kill some people, and then you call in Nightwing, and then Nightwing saves the day, and then you defeat me and I go back to Arkham. But what if we didn't do that? What if we didn't play that game? What if I just basically killed them already? What if I decided to do that? What if I took the fun away from you? Now, the crazy thing about this is that Joker's entire scheme here does have a method to his madness. And that's what makes this so visceral. That's what makes it so interesting, is that where he does just detonate the bridge for the heck of it, and where Batman's entire plan effectively just kind of goes up in smoke, the Joker effectively takes him captive. I mean, he really just kind of takes Batman prisoner, exposes him to all these different, to the Joker toxin, and it sends the possibility, or I guess it makes it a possibility, that Batman is effectively poisoned by the Joker himself. Now, the other half of this is the Joker starts to taunt Bruce with the idea that he's like, I know who you are. Like, I know what you're about. I left you my calling card. He starts referencing things like the Court of Owls. And so the Joker was watching Batman in his whole Court of Owls event. He's been watching everything happen the entire time, and he references things like the Killing Joke. He references things like Nightfall. He references all these scenarios. He talks about Jim Gordon. Oh, Jim Gordon would bleed for the city. And that's why he gave him a blood thinner, was to basically make him bleed for the city. If Jim Gordon wants to be a guy who's going to put his life on the line and bleed for the city of Gotham, then I will make it a reality. And that's what makes it so cool, is because the Joker is basically grabbing these metaphors of what people stand for and taking them from the realm of being a metaphor and making them literal. But at the end of the day, Joker's argument to Batman is that that Nightwing, that Batgirl, that Jason Todd, that Damian Wayne, they're all fake. Like, none of them are real. None of them are who they really are. And this again really hits home to the idea of the Killing Joke. All it ever takes is just just one bad day. That this one bad day wouldn't necessarily send somebody into the realm of madness, it would reveal their true selves. And that's what the Joker's hitting at, is this is not who you really are. This face that you put on, the face of Bruce Wayne, the face of Dick Grayson, the face of Barbara Gordon, the faces that you wear at night is who you really are. You are Batman. Dick Grayson is Nightwing. Now, something to notice here is that he never references any of them by name. He simply just says, I know who you are. But the bigger implication here is that the Joker's kind of hitting home at this idea that perhaps Batman really is just an insane person, that perhaps Batman really is just crazy. And so again, it's this really, really cool situation that maybe the Joker's not as insane as he seems, that maybe the Joker is very much a completely sane person. But ultimately, the Joker is able to make his escape. And the reason why is, of course, the Gotham Police Department shows up, but Joker has his own henchmen, and Joker has his guys fire rockets, at the police cars and incapacitate him and that kind of thing, and makes his escape. But what we end up having here is Bruce Wayne waking up in the Batcave to the other members of the Bat family, to Red Hood, to Red Robin, Tim Drake, to Barbara Gordon Batgirl, to Dick Grayson Nightwing, and Damian Wayne. And this is really cool. And this is where the death of the family concept begins to come into play. Because essentially what happens here is Bruce Wayne basically says, somewhere along the line, the Joker accessed the Batcave. I don't know how he did it. I don't know exactly, where he gained his entry point, but it seems to have been done through me. And what Bruce does is he references this old instance where he and the Joker were fighting on top of a blimp. Of course, this is really kind of a reference back to the older 1960s, 1950s Batman stories, where the Joker was a little more comedic, but also a little more sinister at the same time. And essentially what happened was the Joker was presumed to have been defeated by Batman after having fallen off the blimp, most likely to his death. But this is Bruce also acknowledging his lack of experience, the idea that, well, the Joker's defeated, time to go home, and that's really it. And so of course, Batman had taken a route back to the Batcave. He tried to get some sleep, couldn't get any sleep at all, came back downstairs only to find that there was a Joker card laying in the Batcave in the water. And so of course, again, this is cool because it's the Joker basically saying, I was here in the cave. But even then, this goes back to the Court of Owls, right? Like, it goes back to the whole Court of Owls thing. Bruce Wayne's like, no, the Court of Owls doesn't exist, because if it did, I would have known about it. I would have discovered them. The fact that I know Gotham as well as I do, and the fact that I can't verify the Court of Owls is real, indicates to me that they're not. It's Bruce Wayne's own arrogance. It's his own hubris that always seems to get the better of him. In this scenario, he's just like, well, it probably stuck to like the boat or something like that, right? Like, there's no way the Joker would have gotten into the Batcave, because surely if the Joker knew what our identities were, he would have targeted us individually. But that is what makes the Joker so dangerous, is because maybe he does know the identity of Bruce Wayne. Maybe he does know the identity of Dick Grayson and Barbara Gordon and all these guys. Maybe he does know who they truly are. Maybe he's been watching them every step of their lives for the last year and chose not to do anything. That's what makes him so dangerous, is because there's no way to know for sure. There's no way to know with an absolute certainty. And so what happens is, of course, Batman's investigations ultimately lead him back to Arkham Asylum. And this is really Scott Snyder kind of hitting back at Grant Morrison's story, Arkham, A Serious House on Serious Earth, which between the storytelling and the art, that story is a descent into absolute madness. I mean, that story is insane. If you ever get to read it sometime, I feel like that's the story they would make schizophrenics read, under the belief that it would cure them. Like, it's just, it's almost like turn of the 20th century attempts to cure mental illness. It's just one of the most insane things that you're ever going to see. I couldn't begin to wrap my head around it. Like, I had to put it down. I was like, all right, I am done here. This story is crazy as hell. But from what I understand, if you finish it out all the way, it's an amazing story. That's what I keep hearing. People keep telling me it's one of the greatest stories ever told, and I feel like I should try to read it all the way through. But as Batman makes his way through Arkham Asylum, the reason why I say it's A Serious House on Serious Earth, or kind of a tribute to that, is because from what I did read through Serious House on Serious Earth, it's like a gauntlet, right? It's like Batman going against a bunch of his rogues and different things like that. The inmates of Arkham are essentially allowed to go free. Batman has to face off against them all, working his way all the way down to the secret of what Arkham's origin is really like. And it's very much the same way in the story. He's going against the inmates of Arkham Asylum. He's going against some of the major criminals, Two-Face, Penguin, people who have allied themselves with the Joker along the way. But as he gets through this, he's of course kind of forced to look at this tapestry of experiences. And this is why I say this is where DC started grabbing things from classic DC and rolling them into the history of New 52 Batman. The scene where the fisherman is holding up the fish to Batman, that's from The Laughing Fish. The death of Jason Todd. These are all moments that come from Batman's whole experience, the various escapades that he's been a part of in relation to the Joker, as well as his own stories. And so again, it's DC basically taking these classic DC stories and saying, these have now happened in the New 52. They just happened off panel. We didn't see them take place. It just happened sometime in the past. And so again, after going through these various guys, these various members of Arkham Asylum, Asylum, some of whom are dressing as his villains, some of whom are not. Ultimately, he comes across this kind of really weird, screwed up version of the Justice League, which is really kind of crazy. I mean, it's essentially just employees of Arkham who have no families, nobody would notice them missing, and wouldn't have any questions as to why they're not there. But this is designed for the purpose of kind of forcing Bruce Wayne's hand, you know, essentially saying, look, you know, each one of these guys is going to try to pick up the sword in the stone, so to speak, but it's going to administer an electric shock every time they do, and it's going to kill them. So either you can go through and you can sit in the chair, you know, sit on your throne, so to speak, and spare their lives, or you can watch as each one of them dies. And so, of course, ultimately Batman elects to sit on the chair, and that's really the end of that. He's, you know, more or less electrocuted and knocked unconscious. Now, of course, when he comes to, he is directly in, you know, this cave as it's being held, or I guess as he's being held by the Joker directly. This is the Joker being sadistic and twisted. This is the Joker basically saying, look, these faces of the people that you wear, that's not who you really are. Your face is Batman. Your face is Nightwing. Your face is Barbara Gordon. And symbolically, he's literally cutting their faces off and serving them to them. And that's the initial implication here. Of course, Alfred, having been Jokerized, essentially, you know, having experienced exposure to the Joker toxin. But when these different trays are opened up, the idea seems to be that the faces of Barbara Gordon, Nightwing, Damian Wayne, so on and so forth, those faces have all been cut off and they're being served to them. And so again, it's really twisted, but it also falls in line with the complete insanity of the Joker in the sense that this does not make sense to anybody but himself. It's just so dark and just so gruesome. Now, of course, in the end, Batman really just kind of calls it a day, you know, where all these different guys where they're effectively soaked with gasoline, there's flints under their chairs where they try to move, it'll set the chairs on fire and it'll basically burn them alive. The flame is thrown, Joker intends to kill him, Batman knocks the Joker out of the way and a fight ensues. Now, of course, this also leads to Batman freeing the various members of the Bat family, all of whom are exposed to the Joker toxin once the Joker's two-headed cat explodes. And it's kind of crazy to see because what this does is it shows us their ability to overcome the Joker toxin in the sense that it was really more designed to kind of wreak havoc on them as opposed to actually kill them. But at the same time, the fight between the Joker and Batman has some measure of finality. Now, it's not going to be as final as like Batman Endgame, right? But it still has some measure of finality because what Batman does is he turns the tables on the Joker. And that's what makes it so interesting. Batman basically says, you know who I am and that's cool, but I know who you are. I know what your name is. Now, the implication here in terms of how this unfolds by Scott Snyder really seems to point at the idea that the Joker is a very lonely human being, right? Like the Joker wants somebody else in his life, somebody as crazy as he is, somebody that views the world the same way he does, that the face that he wears is simply a mask, hence the reason he cut his face off and had it reattached, you know, by virtue of strings and staples, that he's trying to get Batman and Dick Grayson, and I guess Batman and Nightwing and these other members of the Bat family to be the same as him. But with Batman essentially confronting him and saying, I know what your name is, I know what your secret is, it's almost like it's this idea that the Joker wants to stay crazy. The Joker doesn't want to know who he is. Now, of course, this is going to hit home to the idea of Endgame. And to kind of talk about that a second, because we'll refresh that once we get to Endgame, the whole idea in the Joker's mind is that he and Batman share a relationship that nobody else will have. That is just part of what they do. They just go round and round and round and round. The Joker escapes Arkham, he's caught by Batman, and the cycle continues, and that's it. That's their thing. It's their shtick. It's what they do. This possibility of Batman growing away from the Joker, this possibility of Batman walking away from the Joker, becoming something greater than what the Joker considers him to be, could ultimately mean there would be no more Joker-Batman dichotomy. Instead, it would just be the Joker running from a guy who's not chasing after him anymore. And so again, the Joker's effectively trying to kind of twist Batman, trying to make him into somebody who's crazy, trying to make him question everything about himself, especially the possibility that his identity might be out there. But ultimately, the Joker really just kind of like falls off a cliff, and that's basically it. I mean, the indication here is that the Joker is essentially dead. That seems to be what it is that happens, or at the very least, he just kind of vanishes. But of course, we know that he'll make his return in Endgame, which is probably one of the greatest stories that was ever written by Scott Snyder with regards to Batman. But again, what also happens is in these last few pages of this story, when the rest of the Bat family is freed, when they're basically treated to overcome their exposure to the Joker toxin, Bruce Wayne tells Alfred that he had previously gone to Arkham Asylum under the guise of making charitable contributions when he confronted the Joker after the Joker had supposedly left his calling card in the Batcave. And Bruce Wayne confronted the Joker with the card, and the Joker pretended like he had no idea, or the Joker gave off the indication that he had no idea who Bruce Wayne was. But that's why this is so important, is because if all the Joker cares about is Batman, then the Joker doesn't care about Bruce Wayne. Bruce Wayne's not relevant to him. So long as Bruce Wayne stays the Batman, then that's all he cares about. That's all he wants. And so again, it's really this idea that it's all about the Joker reacting to who it is that Bruce Wayne really is. And in his mind, Bruce Wayne is really Batman. You know, Bruce Wayne is not Bruce Wayne. The philanthropist, the billionaire, that's the face, that's the costume. The actual person, that's Batman. And so because of that, it's a really, really cool exploration into the mind of the Joker to a degree in terms of how he views the world around him. But ultimately, because of the fact that Batman simply didn't reveal to the other members of the Bat family that the Joker had broken in to the Batcave, the Joker had accessed their identities, seems to be what really puts the nail in the coffin of the Bat family, hence the name, Death of the Family, because in their minds, it was an extreme betrayal of trust, that if the Joker knew who they were individually, the Joker would just track them all down. He would destroy their personal lives. He would kill everybody around them that they cared about, that they knew about. And so again, Batman keeping this hidden meant that at the end of the day, he still didn't trust each of these members of the Bat family, despite everything they'd been through, all the fights that they'd been in, all the conflicts they'd worked on together. Batman still didn't trust who they were. And so it's really just kind of him showing where he is, what he's about. And for the most part, everybody except Dick Grayson really kind of leaves him hanging. Okay, so when it comes to Batman, covering Endgame, when it comes to Batman, it's a very weird situation. And the reason why is because of Darkseid War. Darkseid War was basically the story that just threw a wrench in everything, right? Because you had like Superman stories, and you had Green Lantern stories, and you had Wonder Woman stories, and Flash stories, so on and so forth. And then suddenly it was Darkseid War. Now, for a lot of people, or for a lot of characters, it sort of made sense. But for Batman, it caused all kinds of problems. And this is really where the continuity sort of comes into play with the whole DCU creativity over continuity and what have you. But truth be told, if we wanted to, if we so chose, we could just ignore Batman Endgame. We'd be ignoring an amazing story, but we could ignore Batman Endgame. Or we can try to figure out where Batman Endgame fits in this game of continuity with regards to DC Comics. So my initial thought on this is that if we had to kind of find a place to put it, what we could do is we could basically argue that Darkseid War takes place between Death of the Family and Endgame. Or we could say it takes place after Endgame at some point in time. We don't really know what that point is. Batman's interest in the Joker is still prevalent though during the events of Darkseid War, and so it would make sense that it could possibly take place before Batman Endgame. The problem with this is that if it did take place before Batman Endgame, then we would have seen it referenced in Batman Endgame. And so that's one of the crazy things that goes on with regards to the whole creativity versus continuity. So at the end of the day, we're just gonna go ahead and like tack this on as the story before the events of, or really before going into DC Rebirth. There are a couple stories, like I don't think Graveyard Shift is one of them. I think the next one is Bloom, and the one after that is Epilogue, but those are not wildly important. Those are really just kind of stories that are there for the offering of Bruce Wayne with regards to the whole DCU Jim Gordon Batman, but that was not a really well-received line of storytelling, so we can just kind of pretend like that didn't really happen. I enjoyed it, but for the sake of continuity, we're really not going to worry about that too much. But the fact remains here, Batman Endgame is exactly what it sounds like, right? It's the final event of the Batman comics. I know we did Endgame at one point on my channel here before. Those videos that I had scripted, I think those videos sucked. And so we're going back here and we're just redoing it because I think this is better. And so because of that, with regards to the whole Batman Endgame landscape, it creates a really interesting scenario with regards to this final battle between Joker and Batman. And that was really the nature of what it was that Scott Snyder was hitting on. Batman and the Joker are the 1-2 punch of comic books. And the reason why is because of the fact that the Joker is the most popular villain in comic books. Consistently rated at #1 at the top of everyone's list. The Joker's popular because he's funny, because he's dangerous, because he's kooky, crazy. No one knows what it is that he's gonna do. The other half of this is that Batman is rapidly becoming a superhero who's at the top of almost everyone's list. He consistently outsells Superman's comics. The only exception to that is right now in DC Rebirth, where I think that Superman is outselling Batman because the comics are so good. But during the New 52, Batman was outselling Superman by about 50,000 issues a month. It was crazy how much better he was doing. But the fact remains that when it comes to these two characters, they're just kind of the 1-2 punch of DC when it's good guys and bad guys. And because of that, it was always like the two went hand in hand. You could not have Batman without the Joker. You couldn't reboot Batman without reintroducing the Joker somewhere along the line. Scott Snyder draws on that and says the relationship between Batman and Bruce Wayne transcends comics, it transcends the Joker schemes, it goes into this realm of something eternal. It goes into this realm in this, eternal battle between good and evil, because that's what it represents. And so picking up with this whole Endgame conflict, we initially joined Alfred Pennyworth, Julia Pennyworth, and Bruce Wayne. Now, Julia Pennyworth we can reference here, but we don't really need to know much about her. And the reason why is because she has vanished in DC Rebirth. As far as I'm aware, she is gone, never to be seen or heard from again. And so because of this, during the events of Batman Eternal, which was basically this year-long story that took place between the events of Death of the Family and Endgame, Julia Pennyworth was introduced as this girl who was the alleged daughter of Alfred Pennyworth. And Alfred basically kind of brought her in. She became a part of the Bat family, but she was really more of like the information backup. She was really one that was just kind of there operating behind the scenes, very much in the same capacity that we were traditionally used to seeing Alfred Pennyworth perform. And so really she's just kind of like the information person. Think of her as a less significant, smaller version of like Oracle from Batman, from Barbara Gordon when she was in a wheelchair. So in the middle of their whole conversing and talking and so on and so forth, Batman's immediately attacked by Wonder Woman. Now that's what makes this so cool, is because of the fact that this is basically Batman taking on the entirety of the Justice League. Now, Batman fighting the Justice League raises as many questions as it answers, because if you talk to any Batman fan, they'll tell you, oh yeah, Batman would easily be able to take on the Justice League, no questions asked. I know that because I like him. But if you were to talk to like a Wonder Woman fan, they'll say, no, Batman could never take out Wonder Woman. Wonder Woman's way too capable, she's way too strong. I know that because I like her. Superman, the Flash, Green Lantern, the whole 9 yards. People just stick with the comic book fans that they enjoy the most. For example, I'll say that forevermore that Professor X is the only good leader of the X-Men. Nobody will ever be as good as him. I don't care what people do with Cyclops. But the fact remains here that for the character of Bruce Wayne, one thing that Scott Snyder's been doing the entire time is just building on the nature of him, his intelligence, what he's capable of, so on and so forth. And it's very much a reference to Tower of Babel. For those of you guys who don't know, Tower of Babel was a story that we did a video on, but it basically detailed the idea that Batman had these different protocols, more or less, on how to take down each member of the Justice League. But with regards to this scenario, it really just kind of pops out of nowhere. And so Batman doesn't really have time to enact these protocols. And an argument could be made that with regards to this being the new 52, that maybe no such protocols actually exist. But regardless of the scenario, he does know how to take down these different members of the Justice League. He does know how to incapacitate them. With the character of Wonder Woman, hand-to-hand combat is out of the question. Bruce Wayne just does not have the capacity to take her on. She is a warrior first and a woman second. And so because of that, the ability to reason with her isn't there because she's not in her right mind. She's not in control of her full faculties. And so as a result, Bruce Wayne's basically required to kind of bring in this giant mecha suit, and he does what he can, and he's able to hold her off to a degree. But then we actually have her, once she's kind of defeated to a degree, we actually have the Flash jumping into the scene. Now, of course, this defeat of the Flash is super quick. I mean, it's just some kind of liquid on the ground that's basically slick, and it sends Flash careening into a building, and that's really it. But notice Bruce Wayne does this. He incapacitates each member of the Justice League in relation to what way is easiest to subdue. The Flash runs, so put him on a ground that's too slick for him to gain any traction on, and suddenly he might as well just be skating on ice. Wonder Woman is a warrior. Grab a suit that will allow him to basically combat her, using hand-to-hand combat. Aquaman is essentially a fish out of water. I don't care what anybody says, it's the nature of his character. Put him in a situation to where he basically will not be able to access water, and eventually you'll start wreaking havoc on his body's structure. Superman is the kicker. And the reason why is because after all these members of the Justice League have been defeated, Superman arrives on the scene. Now, this goes without saying. Historically speaking, you allow any Batman story, any Batman line of comics to go on long enough, Batman and Superman will fight. It's just the nature of the beast. It's the way it goes. It's just every single time it always happens that way because we like to see them fight. I love to see Batman and Superman fight, but it always ends up going that route. Now, with regards to Superman's arrival here, what we're also basically shown is that the Justice League is not in their right mind because of the fact that the Justice League have been Jokerized. They have been infected with the Joker toxin. Now, this creates an even more dangerous situation because it's not as though, Batman it's not like, he just like stole Lois Lane from Superman, right? It's not like he's just like, your girl's mine now, and he just ran off with Lois Lane and that's the end of that, and she just bailed out on Superman. That's not the case. He can't talk Superman down. He can't rationalize with Superman. He's just running amok. He's doing what he's told by the Joker. He's just influenced by the Joker's schemes and fighting against Bruce Wayne. The caveat to this comes in the caveat of every Batman fight when it comes to Superman invoking kryptonite. I cannot think of really any major circumstance where Batman has fought Superman and kryptonite has not been invoked in some form or fashion. And so because of this, we basically have Batman using kryptonite gum more or less. It's basically gum that has kryptonite particles that he just spits in the eye of Superman Superman. And that's how he brings Superman down. That's really it. But it also makes sense. I mean, that's the struggle that you have when you have a Batman and Superman, a story where the two of them are going to fight. The question is, how do you have a man who's really smart and really good at fighting, but has the normal strength and abilities of a regular human being going against a veritable god? How do you end that story effectively? You do it the only way you can do, and you use kryptonite. That is the crux of every argument when it comes to Batman versus Superman on every forum, everywhere, across the world. It's always the idea, well, what if Batman didn't have kryptonite? It's like, well, then he would probably die, and that fight would be over really, really quick, and it wouldn't be interesting at all. And so because of that, we always, end up seeing kryptonite invoked here. But with the idea of the Joker basically jokerizing the Justice League, once they're defeated in turn, it's now on Batman to begin going through and finding out why. Now, the reason why this is such a huge deal is because for the most part, the Justice League have never really been subdued by the Joker. Now, what this tells us is the lengths the Joker is going to go to in order to try to get his hands on Batman, in order to basically take this, from the realm of being a, hey, let's just run around and get into a fight, to the realm of actually being a dangerous scenario. But at this point, we transition over to what's left of Arkham Asylum. Now, the reason why I say that is because during the story Batman Eternal, which basically dealt with the idea of Hush rallying the various Batman villains and facing off against Bruce Wayne, Arkham Asylum was destroyed in its entirety. Now, there were a few other things that went into that, but ultimately it led to Wayne Manor being confiscated and then transformed into a new Arkham Asylum. And so with that in mind, one of the orderlies who had worked in Arkham was a guy by the name of Eric Border. Now, Eric Border had about 5 comic book appearances prior to this particular story. And Eric was just a guy that Batman had worked with occasionally, where they were trying to access like the cell of the Joker or something along those lines. But Eric was always a background character that nobody ever had any reason to question. He would just kind of show up for a little bit, and then he would do something, and then that would really be it. He was as forgettable as virtually any other character in comics. The great thing about Snyder writing is he says, yeah, but remember that really forgettable guy? What if he was a very important guy? And what we end up having here is Batman just kind of making his way through Arkham, eventually locked in a cell by Eric, only for Eric to basically reveal the fact that he is the Joker. And so essentially what's been happening this entire time, throughout all the Batman comics following the events of Death of the Family, is the Joker has been there watching Batman every step of the way. The Joker's been walking around Arkham Asylum every step of the way, and no one ever had any reason to believe it was him. Now, there were a couple steps that the Joker took in order to pull this off. The first was to basically use what amounted to muscle relaxers in order to keep his grin from giving him away. The other half was, changing the color of his hair, changing the color of his skin pigmentation, or at least covering his skin pigmentation, and making himself look like a normal person. But the reason why this is such a huge deal, and the reason why this was so significant when it happened, was because of the fact that historically speaking, the Joker has always just sort of been viewed as this nonsensical comedic character where he just kind of engages in these goofy, stupid acts. He's not too bright. He's certainly not some, insane criminal genius. He's just a guy that, does stuff. Batman chases after him, or, Joker gets locked in Arkham Asylum. He escapes, and the story continues again. What Scott Snyder is basically telling us here is that the Joker is not some buffoon. He's not the same kind of goof that we've always thought he's been. Instead, he's a lot smarter than he's previously been given credit for. He's a lot smarter than we would traditionally think him to be, in the sense that he's basically able to trick everybody, including the world's greatest detective, into believing that he's either dead or he's simply just sitting underground when he was among them the entire time. And that's one of the reasons why that's so cool. And so with Batman effectively, locked in a cell, the idea is that the Joker's essentially going to run amok throughout the entirety of Gotham City. He's going to unleash absolute pandemonium and absolute chaos. Now, the problem with this little bit of storytelling here is that Snyder kind of has to jump around a bit. And the reason why is because of the fact that I would imagine that to a degree, this story was probably fast-tracked. If I were gonna be honest with you guys, I would imagine Batman Endgame was probably slated to be a 7 or 8 issue story arc. And I certainly think it would have helped to flesh out some of the small little tidbits here and there. But in this instance, we don't know how Batman got out of his cell in Arkham Asylum. He just did. Now, with regards to Scott Snyder, having this happen, he does it in a couple different ways. He's like, look guys, it's Batman. He's gonna find a way out. I mean, it's, he's not gonna be stuck in a prison cell forever, especially not the prison cell of the old Arkham Asylum that he'd visited so many times before. Surely he would just have to know the ins and outs, and he would always have a way out. And even if he didn't, he would just find a way out for himself, whether it's using something out of his infinitely stored utility belt to blow the hole in a wall or whatever the case may be. He would always end up finding a way out of his captivity and ultimately go free. And so the question that ends up coming to fruition here is, if the citizens of Gotham Gotham City are basically losing their minds if they are being exposed to a Joker toxin, well then why don't we just cure it? Under normal circumstances, that would be the case. The Joker's been using the Joker toxin so many times, it'd be very easy to cure. It'd be very easy to eliminate. The problem with this is that there has been a new ingredient added to the Joker toxin that Batman cannot account for, which means that it can't just be cured. Not only that, the true spooky nature of the Joker begins to come into fruition when we have Commissioner Gordon just looking over all these different details and stories and so on of the Joker's past. And what we end up finding out is that over the last, some odd, few hundred years or so, in all these major calamities and all these major events and all these different terrible scenarios and in everyday life or when random pictures were taken, we ultimately ended up finding the Joker was there. Now, if what's being done in this picture is absolutely true, if what we're seeing is true, then it means that the Joker is some 200 years old, which is absolutely mind-blowing in terms of how it all unfolds. Because then the question becomes, if the Joker's 200 years old, then what does that mean for the character of Batman? Does it mean that Bruce Wayne's just kind of living this repetitive life, or does it mean that someone like Bruce Wayne has always been there to combat the Joker? Again, it raises a lot of these really interesting questions when it comes to the two characters, because what Scott Snyder was kind of dotting in was this idea that the Joker could in fact be this eternal god of chaos, this eternal god of destruction. Now, it does beg a few questions in terms of, how it comes together. I mean, this story's older, we've done this video before, we're just kind of remastering it now, so we really know how it ends. But to just kind of let ourselves live in the moment for a second, it really is kind of a cool scenario, because it begs the question, if the Joker is the god of chaos, if he was the god of order and absolute destruction, then how would that unfold? Is he like an entity? Is he an essence that just takes over one host after another? Or is he legitimately immortal? Will he always end up just kind of being reincarnated and, his body will always resurrect itself? How does that all come together? That mystery, that intrigue, that kind of, wow, what in the world's going on? The cloak and dagger element of the Joker's past is what makes this so possible, because no one knows the tried and true story of the Joker. There's some origins that have more credibility than others. The Killing Joke, for example, the Joker having been Red Hood. But the question is that true, or is it just an idea that's maintained because no one knows the right answer? Is that answer used in place of the absolute truth? It's basically supplying the best thing we can offer for an answer because we don't know what the real answer is. And so following this, the Joker's effectively waging a one-man war against everything that Batman knows and loves. And that's the basis behind this. That's the nature of this. Bruce Wayne is basically forced to see a repeat of his own past in the form of Joe Chill. Now, for those of you guys who are reading All-Star Batman right now, this is one of the reasons why we're doing Batman Endgame, and this is one of the reasons why the question of Batman Endgame continuity comes into play, because what we end up having is the introduction of Duke. Now, of course, Duke is basically a boy who's forced to witness the same, or forced to experience the same kind of violent scenario as the parents of Bruce Wayne, in the sense that he's forced to possibly witness his own parents being killed. Now, of course, Batman jumping into the fray, Batman stopping the Jokerized Joe Chill, allows Duke's parents to live. The issue with this is that they're exposed to the Joker toxin, and there doesn't seem to be any way to cure it. They're effectively lost. And so, of course, Bruce Wayne grabs Duke and they essentially take off. That's how Duke gets introduced to DC Comics, and that's why he plays a pretty significant role in the life of Bruce Wayne, because his origin is almost identical to the origin of Jason Todd in the pre-Crisis era, of Dick Grayson, before Crisis on Infinite Earths and after Crisis on Infinite Earths. The idea that they had lost their parents under some, violent circumstance, and they're effectively left an orphan, just like Bruce Wayne. Not only that, these lengths that the Joker will go to secure his own ends, to secure his campaign, are shown to have virtually no limits. I mean, there are babies that are Jokerized, which is pretty twisted and pretty screwed up. But of course, where Jim Gordon is essentially making this case, where he's talking directly to Bruce Wayne, saying, hey, look, the Joker almost caught me, the Joker almost killed me, I managed to subdue him. Ultimately, the Joker effectively comes back and ends up taking out Commissioner Gordon. Not really permanently, not really killing him. I mean, he stabs him in the chest with an axe, so you would think that would basically get him killed, but then we end up having, having Commissioner Gordon just kind of pop up with his Joker toxin. Now again, at this point, it's doing what can be done in order to stem the tide of absolute chaos of Gotham City. And that's really the significance of this moment, is because the city's just devolving into complete and total pandemonium. You have soldiers who are Jokerized and they're just riding around in tanks, carrying out the Joker's wishes and wants. You have people who are just ripping the town apart. I mean, it's just absolutely nuts. And it's a really, really cool moment to see. And it's a really cool bit of chaos that goes on here. And the reason why is because there's always been this sort of decorum with the Batman landscape, right? Like things get close, things get close to the point where maybe Gotham's a little bit beyond redemption, maybe it's a little bit beyond hope, but it never quite crosses that line. The city of Gotham never quite steps off that ledge. There's really no one to push it there. And an argument could be made that all the Joker's really doing here is exposing Gotham for what it really is, a city that's just slowly spiraling out of control, and Batman doing the best he can to stem the flow. But what happens when this wall that's got these few punctures here and there and water spewing in, and Batman's keeping the water coming in with little bits of gum? What happens when somebody starts blowing a hole in that wall? Well, there's no one to stem the tide. He's basically just revealing Gotham for its true nature, the insanity of the city, the fact that it's beyond any real measure of hope, the fact that it is a city that's quite literally just in a state of self-destruction. Now, of course, Bruce Wayne's journeys and his desire to try to figure out what's going on, what this hidden chemical compound is in this virus, brings him to a villain by the name of Crazy Quilt. Now, as far as I'm aware, Crazy Quilt, as he exists here in the New 52, is a wholly new creation, or kind of a rework by Scott Snyder, but this is the first time we've seen him. Of course, he's a Jack Kirby character that goes all the way back to really before the New 52, and maybe even shortly after Crisis on Infinite Earths, possibly even before. But this is really just kind of like a new iteration of him. But he's really just a guy who's kind of obsessed with, science and medicines and studies and so on and so forth. But he's a guy who always sort of felt like he was playing second fiddle and kind of left out of this bigger circle of greater guys, in comparison to like Hugo Strange and Dr. Death and so on and so forth, because those are scientists in the community of villains who are viewed to be the best of their sort. Crazy Quilt's just kind of considered to be like this B or C-list guy. And so what he's really doing here, and the reason why he's allied himself with the Joker, is to try to solidify himself as being one of the foremost scientists in the realm of villainy. And the motivation behind this is a chemical that's called dionysium. Now, this is where Scott Snyder begins to move the story away from like mythology and, weird mystery and intrigue and possibly even some ghost storytelling, and basically moves it back into the realm and brings it back to being grounded in science and reality and structure, at least as close as you can get to reality with a comic book. But what Snyder also does is he invokes guys like Vandal Savage. He invokes guys like Ra's al Ghul, and he says, these are not just mystical beings. Vandal Savage is not some guy who's just inherently immortal. It doesn't work that way. Ra's al Ghul is not a guy who just stumbled across the Lazarus pit one day and just started dipping himself in it. The reason why they are immortal is because of dionysium. But Vandal Savage was the first and only person to encounter dionysium in its most pure form. Ra's al Ghul found it, but it's corrupted, and it's the reason for why whenever he delves himself into the pool, he comes out with temporary madness. The dionysium that the Joker uses is an even more impure version. And that's something that I hope you notice, that it's basically stages of impurity that move you closer and closer to madness. The most pure version has no side effects of complete madness. An impure version, or a relatively impure version, can bring you temporary madness, as in the form of someone who emerges out of the Lazarus pits. And if a version is too impure, it'll simply drive you insane, which seems to be the case with the Joker. Now, of course, with regards to Decker himself, the motivation here is that he was basically told by the Joker, look, if you help me out, I will give you dionysium. It'll effectively make you immortal, and you can use this substance for whatever, desire, whatever dream it is that you have. Of course, against the wishes of Batman, he injects himself with this syringe, and ultimately his body begins breaking down on the on the genetic level, on the cellular level, and he really just kind of goes to pieces. Now, of course, this is really Snyder kind of giving us a timetable. It's him fast tracking things. What we end up finding out here is that with regards to the Joker himself, in terms of like the Pale Man mythos, it's what he's been building on his entire life and his entire existence, and we'll get more to that once we get closer to the ending of this story. But the reason why this is fast tracked, and the reason why we're given a really quick timetable, is because we're seeing what the end result of exposure to this virus is going to be. There's effectively a 24-hour window between the time that a person is exposed to the virus and the time that a person ends up with the same fate as Crazy Quilt. The reason why he died so fast is because he had it immediately ingested into his bloodstream, whereas individuals who breathe it in as a gas have a little bit more time before they effectively die. And so because of this, Batman takes the only route that he can take in terms of trying to find out what dionysium is, if it even really exists in Gotham City, and he travels back to the Court of Owls. Now remember, the Court of Owls was this organization that had existed for hundreds of years. We talked about that with regards to our Court of Owls and Night of Owls story. It was an organization that had been existing as part of the criminal underworld in Gotham for hundreds of years, and Batman didn't know about it. but the talents do have access to something that is effectively able to resurrect the dead. This, of course, leads Batman to ask the question, what is going on? What do you guys know about this substance? Have you ever used it? Now, of course, this is again confirmation of the fact that the Court of Owls uses Dionysium to basically resurrect those individuals who were talents and then have them work for the court themselves, in addition to the electrum chemical that they have ingested inside of their body by virtue of their bloodstream and long-term exposure. Again, we covered that in our video about Night of Owls, but the fact remains here that in the eyes of the court are actually ready to let Gotham City die. And that's really kind of the crazy situation about this, is because you would think that it would just simply be a mutual desire to keep that city going, but that's not the case. The court basically makes the argument, look, this city's going to die. I mean, this city's going to be destroyed. It'll be rebuilt once the Joker leaves, and then we will again be rulers of this city once it comes back to the way that it's supposed to be. We were literally guided and molded into the image that we desire. And so because of that, what we end up having is the Joker essentially sneaking in the Batcave. Again, this is basically Scott Snyder grabbing all these different elements, grabbing all these different things. The instance where Batman had talked about how somewhere along the line, the Joker had gained access to the Batcave. It's a reference to this yet again. The Joker has gained access to the Batcave again. The difference here is that Alfred tries to take him out with a shotgun. Now, this is kind of cool because this is Alfred being pretty hard ass, and we really kind of know that with his character. When it comes down to it, Alfred's got it where it counts. He's not the strongest, he's not the best fighter, but come hell or high water, he will protect the Batcave and Batman as best he can. And so Alfred, of course, his hand is chopped off. Now, this is why I say we can really kind of look at the idea of Endgame and we can determine its continuity for ourselves, because Alfred's hand is not cut off in DC Rebirth. His hand is well intact. And unless he managed to grow a new one, I do not believe there's an explanation of how this reconciles with the existing Batman continuity. I think it's just kind of ignored and it's just really just kind of left there. It may have been reattached in a story that I'm not familiar with, but as far as I'm aware, like it was just cut off and that was really the end of that. But with the Joker kind of going through with this massive parade throughout Gotham City, as grotesque as it is, ultimately the Bat family kind of stems things off as best they can. They do what they can to kind of save the day, but it ultimately comes down to Batman actually making friends with the various members of his rogues gallery. And again, this is really one of those scenarios where it's just mutually assured destruction, MAD, if they don't act together. And so it's really in the best interest of the various villains, Poison Ivy, Clayface, so on and so forth, to work together in order to bring the Joker down. Now, this also begins the process of us being able to see Clayface become a good guy. And that's one of the cool things. It's slow. It's a very, very slow build, but these are the baby steps. These are the things that eventually lead into that. And so what ends up happening is, of course, Batman comes up with a plan because it's Batman and he's always got a plan, and the story's got to end somehow. And so what ends up happening here is it's really like Dick Grayson dressed as Batman serving to distract the Joker. And where the Joker initially believes that he's effectively taking control of Batman, basically has him held captive, ultimately when the ruse is revealed and it turns out to be Dick Grayson, the Joker immediately picks up on the fact that Batman's found Dionysium. And so of course with the various bombs planted around the Dionysium mine effectively having been not really deactivated, but basically kind of held off by Julia Pennyworth, what this does is it leads to a final confrontation between the Batman and the Joker. Now, the reason why this is so huge and the reason why this is so important is because Scott Snyder is doing a lot more than just saying, and it's Batman and the Joker fighting each other. It's not like that. Instead, this battle is designed to represent every ounce of conflict the two have ever had. Every instance where they've ever fight, going all the way back to Batman #1. Every instance where the Joker and Batman have come together, they've engaged in some campaign and the Joker's defeated and he goes to Arkham Asylum. This is designed to be the story to end all stories, the battle to end all battles between the Joker and Batman in the traditional sense. Now, as we know in DC Rebirth, we will see like the three Jokers. That's really what's just kind of being hinted at. That's a story that's going to be given to us. And that of course comes out of Darkseid War. Again, a little bit of a kind of the continuity going back and forth, but even the Joker himself really kind of makes comments to the idea that it's almost comedic. They've been fighting for so long. They've been enemies for so long. This was really the only end result. This is Scott Snyder hitting to the idea of like the Killing Joke, right? When Batman goes and he sits down and he talks to the Joker and says, if we keep going, one of us is going to die. It's grabbing all these themes of Batman throughout the decades of his storytelling and bringing them all together into one cohesive story and saying, this was the most logical outcome. Somewhere along the line, there was going to be a battle to the death between Batman and the Joker. Now, the funny thing about this is that the Joker's sanity, or at the very least, what seems to be the illusion of sanity, begins to basically come to the surface when Batman effectively prevents him from accessing the Dionysium in order to basically go through and heal himself from his injuries and maintain his longevity. But in this moment of desperation, the tables are turned. Batman seems to be the insane one. Batman is the one that doesn't care whether he lives or dies. He's ready to die with the Joker. The Joker's struggling to live. The Joker's struggling to come out on top. And that's why this is so cool, is because it's a reversal example of what we're used to in the last few moments of what seems to be their lives. Batman and the Joker switch places. Suddenly Batman's the guy who doesn't care anymore, and the Joker's the one that cares about living. So again, it's kind of a cool little bit of a scenario here, but in what appears to be the death of Bruce Wayne, we pick up basically 2 weeks later with, the bat signal basically being broadcast out in terms of just memoriam of sorts, the Bat family, of course, seeming to grieve, Alfred definitely not being able to get over this, but it's also this idea that even Alfred and Julia have to come to grips with the fact that it was inevitable that Batman was going to die. It was inevitable that Bruce Wayne was going to die as Batman because his life is tragedy. That's what his life is. And it was never going to be anything other than that because he was almost like a martyr. It was almost like this idea of I'll fight as best I can. I'll stem off against the bad guys as best I can. But if I die, maybe it'll inspire other people to take up my mantle and become even better superheroes than I was. It was really just kind of setting himself up for the purpose of keeping the Batman legacy and keeping the Batman mantle continuously going on. But with that being said, guys, we are going to go ahead and bring this video to an end. If you are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like. Again, we can really just kind of drop it off here. We know Batman's alive, so we know that he survived the experience, but we can go ahead and kind of drop it off here, wrap up our New 52 Batman explanation series. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments in terms of Scott Snyder's Batman run. I think it's absolutely stellar, and yeah, I will catch you all later. Peace.